Hey everybody. As Judith said, I'm Brian. I've been helping artists get work visas for a long time. I'm an artist myself, musician, been in bands, played in New York, Philadelphia for a long time. So I feel like I can talk the talk and walk the walk. I love my work and I love helping artists as much as I can. My focus at my firm is performing arts. A lot of this information will apply to getting visas in general, but we're going to focus today on people on stage and the crews that would be touring with artists. So without further ado, the first question to ask yourself when you're going through this process is, do I even need a work visa? The US government indicates that your activities determine whether or not you need a work visa. It's not whether or not you're being paid. A lot of people have that misconception. I'm coming over, but it's an unpaid performance, so I don't need a work visa. It's not true. There are some exceptions to needing a work visa. One of the main exceptions that we run into is what we consider the showcase exception. A good example of that is the South by Southwest Festival in Austin, Texas, that happens every year. It's a major industry conference, and there's many smaller industry events that are similar to South by Southwest. The government looks at it as this is an inclusive industry event. You buy a badge, it's not open to the public. No one can just go and buy a ticket. So, and South by has also done a lot of lobbying to make sure that their artists can come in without a work visa. So, and South by would usually give you like a letter that you can give to a customs officer and say, hey, I'm coming to perform only my official South by showcases or whatever the event is. Please let me in without a visa. Another one is cultural programs. If the event or performance is sponsored by your home country's government and the audience is non-paying, that would be a exception to needing a visa. And a lot of times for managers, specifically like business managers, if you're not carrying gear or assisting the artist, taking payment, or liaising with the artist at the show, if you're just there to attend the show, if you're there to shake hands or sign contracts, attend a business meeting, you don't need a work visa for that activity. Those are sort of the main ones. There are other exceptions, but those would be the ones that we encounter a lot. And if you're eligible for one of those exceptions, you determine that you don't need a work visa, you would go and get an ESTA. ESTA, it stands for the Electronic System for Travel Authorization. It's very easy. You just go online, the ESTA website, you apply. There's a very small fee, and then you just get your ESTA status that way. If you're not eligible for ESTA, you have some sort of issue, such as like a criminal record, you would apply for a B1, B2 visa. Both of these statuses are considered tourist statuses or very limited business statuses. And to get a B1, B2, it's a non-petition based status. You just fill out a form and attend an interview at the embassy in Amsterdam.
Can I ask you a question?
Go for it. Happy to.
Is it possible to go like as a songwriter producer without a work visa? If you don't get like a session fee?
So no, actually, again, the government bases it on your activities. So if you, and it's ultimately, this is what this slide says, it's ultimately up to the immigration officer that you encounter. So yes, it's possible, but it's sort of a coin flip. Because instead of determining here, while you're here, whether or not you need a visa, if you go there, if you've already traveled and you're at the airport and you're talking to a customs officer and they're like, what are you doing? like, what's the nature of your activities here when they're inspecting your passport and you're going through customs. If you say, hey, I'm a songwriter, I'm coming to, work here, that doesn't look good. It's a sort of ancient rule, but there is a recording exception, something that I don't usually talk about during the presentation because it's sort of antiquated. There's a recording exception that says you're allowed to come to the US to utilize recording facilities without a work visa, provided that the recordings won't be released in the US, which doesn't really make sense nowadays with the advent of the internet, because now all recordings are globally released. So we've sort of interpreted that exception as being if the recordings are pursuant to a non-US label, then you can make the argument that I'm just here to record and then I'm heading home and it's all pursuant to a Dutch label contract. If it is a US label contract that you're recording pursuant to, then I think that would be enough of a reason for them to deny you. And again, you're sort of leaving yourself open to being denied at the border if you're not fully prepared to adequately explain why you don't need a work visa for the activities. So we say that unless you're really prepared, such as going to a South by Southwest or similar showcase event where you have a letter from the producers of the event that says this is the specific reason why you don't need a work visa to do this activity. And I think that there is a chance that you're leaving yourself up to being denied at the border. And those sorts of denials sometimes can be a hefty fee to pay in terms of they will deny you either for 1 year, 5 year, or 10-year ban if you're showing up and you don't have the proper documentation for the activities that you're doing. So yeah, it's not based on whether or not you're being paid, because while this is like we're talking about high skill work where, if Elton John is coming to the US to perform, only Elton John can perform Elton John songs. It's not like Elton John is taking business away from somebody else. It's not like you're a woodworker coming over and taking woodworking jobs away from US woodworkers. If your band is getting booked to perform at a show in the US, only your band can perform your band's song. So it's not like the way the US government looks at it is that if you're coming over and performing for free or working without payment, that you're still depressing the wages of US workers. And when you start untangling that argument, it doesn't work with the arts a lot of the times, but that's the way the US government looks at it. But that's a good question. So, yeah, that's what this slide's about. Sort of, again, hammering home that whether or not you need a visa, and if you're coming with ESTA or B1, B2 visas, to know that if there still is a chance that you're leaving it up to the CBP officer at the border or the airport to determine whether or not you're going to be entered or not. So if there is a niggling doubt that you may or may not need a visa, it may be safer to just get a work visa rather than deal with a CBP officer determining that for you. A lot of times these CBP officers, the customs officers, aren't super well trained, or they don't know the ins and outs of the legal regulations for all the visa classifications, because we're talking about OMP visas. They have visas from A to Z and 3 times over. So there's all sorts of visas that you can get depending on what you're coming to do. So yeah, I think, if you're sort of in between whether or not you need a visa, you're coming to just record, but we're talking about an antiquated recording exception. You know, it may be better to just get a work visa, even though, you know, it costs money and time, rather than deal with an issue when you get to the border. So you determine you need a work visa. Now what? For performing artists, what we're talking about today, O's are the classification for individual artists. So if you're not in a band and you're an individual of what they say extraordinary ability, you would seek an O1 visa. O2 visas are for if you needed to bring crew, backing band, tour manager, any sort of technical staff. They would seek O2s connected to your O1 visa. Yeah.
What if you are an artist and you have your own label? Your label is based here in the Netherlands,
Uh-huh.
and you would go there to write and to work with producers and record whatever, but still you put it on at DSP, so it's
Yeah.
available international. But you have your label here, your own label.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, it's talking about sort of like the recording exception. And I personally advise my clients, you know, this is a nuanced part of whether or not you would be eligible for ESTA or a B1, B2 visa. I think like if you have plans that include performing at all, I think getting a visa and then incorporating your songwriting or recording or mixing, mastering, whatever it is, into that plan is a safer bet, because again, you're leaving the decision making up to a customs officer when you've already arrived. So I think if there are a lot of songwriters here that are trying to want to come to the US and record, I think a good option would be to pay the $190 and just go and get a B1, B2 visa from the embassy. Then you're leaving the decision up to a consular officer at the embassy or the consulate here, rather than paying for a flight and traveling over, and then you're there and then a customs officer is like, no, you can't come in without a work visa. At least then you're saving your time and money on a flight and potentially opening up yourself to a band. So I think that is a good option. The B1, B2 visa is not petition based. So you would just fill out what's called a DS-160 form online. And then once that's filled out, then you pay the embassy fee, which is roughly 190 US, and then schedule the interview, attend the interview, show up, bring your documentation and say, this is what I'm doing. I just need a B1, B2 visa because I'm not working. I'm just coming to utilize recording facilities in the US, and see what they say. Because
it would be only like songwriting, focus on writing, like from the publishers from LA that wants to sign me. So it makes sense for me to be there for a longer period of time based on my ESTA. And then I have the people from the publisher, friends that have like high positions, whatever labels, but they can like give an autograph, like a signature or whatever. You can do actually, and then you can ask for a visa, apply for a visa.
So I think your question involves coming here and then wanting to stay here once you're here on ESTA or a tourist visa. It's a bit complicated. ESTA is also referred to as the Visa Waiver Program. And in order to either change your status or extend your status while you're here, you need to be here on a visa. You can't extend your stay or change your status when you're here on ESTA.
And here you mean the States. Yeah.
Sorry, yes. In the US. Where am I again?
No, when you read it, like when I'm in LA and they say, hey.
Yeah, when you're in the US.
The deal's only for a year, so.
ESTA is only, it can only be, 90 days. And you're waiving a visa. You're saying, I don't need a visa. I'm just here as a tourist, or I'm here for doing non-work activities. Work activities according to the government. So ESTA is an easier process because you're not going and attending an interview and getting a visa printed in your passport. You just apply online,
Yeah.
and then you show up with just your passport without a visa in it. So there's no way to extend your stay once you're here on ESTA. You would need a visa in order to either extend your stay or change your status. And if you're here on a B1 visa and then you determine that, oh, I want to start working, you wouldn't be able to extend your stay. You would need to change your status once you're here with a B visa, change over to a work visa so you can start doing work activities.
So work to the B1, B2 work visa would be.
B1, B2 is a tourist status / limited business. Limited business would mean you're not working and doing what the government considers work activities. It would be, for example, utilize a recording facility, or you're just attending a conference, or you're meeting, label heads to, shake hands and or sign a contract or attend a business meeting. It's nothing that would involve performing work activities, which would be like performing a show or, earning money but, again, it gets complicated in terms of whether or not the activity you're doing also is tied to money or not. So I think we can talk more in detail about your specific situation. Yeah. See me later. Yeah. We can talk more about your specific situation, but yeah, keep this train on the tracks. The other main visa classification for performing artists is the P visa, and that applies to ensembles like bands. And so you have P1 for what they consider internationally recognized ensembles. The main hurdle to prove for bands is showing that you have either toured outside of your home country or you have press from outside of your home country. That's what they're looking for mainly when they adjudicate the P visa petitions. So a lot of times we have bands coming and they've existed for like a year and they have lots of good press in their home country and they've toured all really impressive venues in their home country, but they don't have a lot of international recognition. And that's the main thing that you need to know for bands looking to get visas. P3 is another visa classification. It's more for culturally unique artists. So if you're performing on a traditional instrument of some kind, I think that's a good marker. Or you're singing in a native language or wearing a traditional wardrobe. I think those are all sort of indicators, but you can sort of play with that a little bit, expand what would be considered culturally unique. So those are the main types of visas for performing artists. I'm going to keep going. How do you get a work visa? The first step would be to determine who is your U.S. sponsor or U.S. petitioner. The government says that you can't file a petition yourself. You need someone in the U.S. to file a petition for you. It's a bit annoying in this day and age of everything being digital. They want you to physically print out all this documentation to prove your eligibility and mail it to their offices. So that's why you need someone in the U.S. with a U.S. address to mail the documentation to you, to the government. So identifying your petitioner is sort of the first step of filing the work visa petition. My firm has a nonprofit called Tamizdat. They can fill this role as your petitioner for a small fee if you don't have a strong U.S. base of like a U.S. manager, agent, or label. But anyone can be the U.S. petitioner. It can be like a cousin or an uncle or somebody. Anybody that that is a friend in the U.S. that has a U.S. address, it's a U.S. citizen or U.S. entity, can function as your petitioner. And then once you've figured out who your petitioner is and who's going to file the paperwork for you on the US side, you can start gathering the evidence for your petition. You can think of the evidence for your case as two main buckets. The first bucket is employment documentation, and the other bucket is like eligibility evidence. So for employment evidence, mainly contracts and an itinerary. They want to see where you're working and how much you're earning throughout the period that you want the visa to be valid for. And the eligibility evidence, I don't want to go too in depth into it because there's a lot of criteria that they outline that you can satisfy. You can either show that you have a major national or international award, or you can try and satisfy these 3 out of 6 criteria. And it involves stuff like press or recommendation letters, evidence that you performed at impressive venues or events.
Just
Yeah.
just to clarify, I can have like all the papers on the petition online here, and then I can, for example, send to my friend already, fill it up, and then my friend just send to the government.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so once you have all your documentation together, send it over to your petitioner, and then there's some forms that they can print out from the USCIS website. You're filing the petition documentation with the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services part of the government. And this whole process, yeah, go for it.
What exactly is the responsibility of the petition?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the only responsibility is just functioning as your sponsor. They don't want people mailing in documentation from abroad.
What about like
There's no
invoicing and stuff? Like say you have like a friend
Yeah.
that's a petitioner,
Yeah.
and I do a show. Do they have to invoice for me, or is it like completely?
So part of filing the petition, there are fees, and we'll get there. You can either cut a check or you can like print out a form that is like for a credit card. You fill out like your credit card information and you send that with the petition.
I mean, like once you already have the visa, say I have a visa and my passport,
Yeah.
and I start working, is my petitioner still like? Do they have to be involved in how I get paid and that kind of stuff?
No, they just simply function as this petitioning entity.
Like for your
There's
wedding.
no liability
And
involved.
they don't have to do any tax.
I mean, the only liability that would happen would be, say they sponsor you, you come over here and you decide, I love the US, I'm never leaving, I'm not going back, I'm just gonna stay here. You know, that would look poorly for you, whoever sponsored you to come over here.
Mhm.
And then I don't think anything would happen one time, but like if they then sponsor your friend to come over and then they want to stay here and then another friend, they start to build a case against you or whoever's petitioning, sending all these
Okay.
petitions to the government, and then it could, get in trouble.
Okay.
So basically, you just need to send to this United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. That's the address that you just need to send this documents to.
Yeah. Well, another thing to keep in mind is that there are multiple service centers that you can mail into, and based on where your petitioner is where you would mail in the documentation. So my firm is based in, and our affiliate nonprofit is based in Brooklyn. We would mail into the Vermont Service Center. But if your petitioner is like in LA, you would mail into the California Service Center. So that's a great question. Yeah, it depends on where your petitioner is based, is where you would send the documentation. So yeah, once you've got your petition all together, it's sent in. There are sometimes issues. The government should review and adjudicate the petition holistically, but sometimes they can be real nitpicky with it. And it's not just either approved or denied. They will give you a chance to correct whatever issues they see with the petition by sending you what's called a request for, sending the petitioner what's called a request for evidence or an RFE. It gives you a second chance to correct whatever issues there are. Maybe you forgot to put a form in there, or they think that maybe you're not eligible and they want you to send more documentation to satisfy whatever criteria they feel like you didn't satisfy. So they would send an RFE. And then if your petitioner responds to the RFE and they're still not satisfied, that's when they would then issue a denial. Denials aren't the end of the world. You can always reapply. My firm generally advises our clients to wait at least like 6 months to a year until you can gather some more documentation to help your case. But yeah, there's no real like super negative impact. I mean, I think in practice, I found that the government's antennas start to go up when they see, oh, this person's been denied before. So generally try and send a new petition after denial with serious overkill and just as much documentation as you can to try and get the new filing approved. Yeah.
Could you elaborate on the documentation a bit more? What?
Sure. Yeah.
What helps? What is?
Yeah. Getting into the weeds a little bit, but I'm happy to go over the base points. So the documentation would be basic stuff like a biography, and press, recommendation letters. The 6 criteria are, the first one is evidence that you performed in a leader starring role for distinguished productions or events. Second criteria is press, major national or international publications. They're looking for like critical reviews, interviews, features, but any publications could be blogs. Doesn't have to be like a newspaper or magazine, but the more highly circulated the publication, the better. The third criteria is similar to the first criteria. They want to show that you've performed in a leader starring role for distinguished organizations or establishments. So in terms of the music industry, that would be like impressive clubs or venues. The fourth criteria is industry metrics. So like high rated reviews or chart success. And I'm going to keep talking about music because that's my wheelhouse. But like a lot of this criteria would apply to actors or theater or comedians. But I come from a music background, so I sort of focus on music stuff. The fifth criteria is recommendation letters, testimonials from impressive people in your field. They would talk about why they're an authority or an expert to recommend the visa, and also discuss some of your accomplishments within the letter. And the last criteria is remuneration. Any like high wage contracts you've ever gotten from performing, or any evidence that you've earned a high wage compared to others in your field. So those are the 6 criteria. The government says you need to satisfy at least 3 out of those 6 in order to be approved. So if you have some press and you've done some cool shows and you have some friends in the industry that can write some letters for you, that would be enough right there.
To what extent do they clarify it's in case of denial?
Good question. Sometimes this gobbledygook. It's like, did this officer even read the petition? But a lot of times they're fairly articulate and say, you submitted articles from, XYZ publications. We don't think that they're, highly circulated enough. Send us better publications. Or like you send some recommendation letters and they're like, well, the author of the letter doesn't really discuss your accomplishments in detail. They more so discuss like your attributes, that you are like a great guitar player and so many scales and you can really play a good guitar solo. But they're looking for whatever specific accomplishments you've done. So there's different things that they would maybe ding you on in order to issue an RFE. Penny.
Thank you. I want to ask you, in the case that you perform in 2 different areas of art,
Mm-hmm.
And you, for example, I'm a singer and visual artist,
Mm-hmm.
and I already have some art contest winning in New York and Washington D.C. And I can use this as a documentation for my music, or it's totally different.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you can think of your activities as sort of a spectrum. So generally, say you're a singer-songwriter and you're coming here to primarily work as a singer-songwriter, but you also want to design the cover art for your album. I think that would be fine in terms of doing visual artwork, as long as it's sort of pursuant to
It's like
your
a-
music career, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but
But
it's like a portfolio, what I'm doing and showing that, look,
Yeah,
I already win few art contests in your country, like,
I think unfortunately, if it's completely separate work, like if you're coming here and you want to do music, but then you also want to like curate an art show or something that doesn't have anything to do with your music career, you would unfortunately need a work visa that
so I'm gonna
is
need
a,
like, I sing, I paint, and I write, so I'm gonna need 3 visa for each area, or just if I want to make I don't know, this year I want to make an exposition,
Mhm.
and I already have a portfolio there, and I come and make the exposition, I apply for the visual artist. But next year I want to come as a singer and songwriter.
Yeah.
What I'm gonna apply for singing and songwriter visa, or I can use my visa as a visual artist.
Yeah, so it can seem a bit of a cash grab sometimes with the way the government delineates their immigration regulations. It's unfortunate, but from the US government's perspective, and I don't agree with this, but from their perspective, that part of their purpose is to protect American workers' interests. So they want to see that you're a renowned musician if you're coming to do music. And they want to see if you're separately a renowned artist if you're, or, painter if you're going to come and paint murals. And you would need to get a visa that specifically discusses, like you need to file a petition that is all about your, art career. And then you could come and do your artwork. If you're coming to do music, then you would need to file a separate petition for that. You can concurrently be under multiple work authorizations, as they say, while you're here. So you can, maybe I should talk to you about this afterwards. Yeah, I think it's getting very specific for your situation, but yeah, let's talk, find me afterwards. Yeah,
What I want to know that this situation can be on extraordinary qualities
Mhm.
or just cultural uniqueness artists.
There are 2 separate visa classifications.
Yes.
P3 visas can be an individual or a group. It doesn't have to be a group. You can get a culturally unique visa as an individual. Yeah. So after your petition's approved and you have the approval notice, everyone in the world has to go for a embassy interview, except for Canadians. If you're Canadian, you just show up at the border with your approval and they'll stamp your passport with a visa stamp. Everywhere else, you need to go and do a face-to-face interview with a consular officer. It's usually pretty quick and painless. It's like 5 minutes. They ask you some slightly intrusive questions, and then they withhold your passport for usually anywhere from 7 to 10 days, and then they courier it back to you with the visa inside. The first step of the visa processing is filling out, I mentioned earlier, it's called a DS-160 form. It is a long list of questions that are personal questions you know, like what's your mother's maiden name and stuff like that. They want to know if you've ever been to the US before. It's part of the background check that they do on you. That's part of the embassy processing. They want to do a background check, basically make sure you're not a terrorist or a drug dealer or some other nefarious thing. And then once you fill that out, you pay the fee, schedule the interview, attend it. And like I said, they have to withhold your passport, print the visa into it, and then send it back to you. So it's good to allot that part of the process, usually leading up to the US entry date. Sometimes with scheduling the interview, I run into a lot of issues with my clients that book a tour leading up to the US entry date, and they haven't allotted enough time to be without their passport for at least a week or two. And then all of a sudden they're like, but I need to be in London, and then for a couple of days, and then I need to be in Italy, and then I need to be, and then I'm going over to the US. Well, it's like, well, you need to make sure that you're allotting time to be without your passport in the weeks leading up to the US entry. And if you have your ducks in a row far enough in advance, then maybe you can leave your passport and then get it back and then do the tour leading up to the US entry. But generally advised to allot time leading up to the US entry date, because you're a little bit at the mercy of the embassy's schedule. And a lot of times they will book your appointment. They'll have appointments available, but they'll usually show you the available appointments in the weeks leading up to the US entry. So it's good to know that, I think, for that part of the process. The final step, you got your petition approved, you got your visa approved, you have the visa in your passport, and you just have to enter the US. Yay! Woo! 99.9% of the time, you're golden at that point. I guess there is a very, very slight chance that a customs officer could be like, no, but once you have the visa in your passport, there's very little chance that you would not be denied at the border. A good thing to note is that the visa is an entry document. It doesn't technically control your status and the amount of time that you're allowed to remain in the US. The consular officers at the port of entry, the airport, they'll enter into their computer system your information from the visa. I don't know, I just went through customs, and you know, sometimes the officers are there for a long time and they fat finger the keyboard and they mess up your information. So a good thing to do once you're admitted into the US after you pass through customs is to look up what is called your I-94 travel record. You can look it up online. You just put in your passport information, and then it shows you your admit until date, that your status, and you want to make sure that your I-94 matches your visa. If it doesn't, you know, you can get that fixed while you're at the airport, or you can email the airport to get that fixed. Most of the time it's fine, so it's not something you really should worry about, but it's always good to check just in case. Okay, so rewinding, how long should you allot for this whole process? When you're filing the petition, there's 2 processing rates that the USCIS will adjudicate your petition at, regular or premium. Regular processing is cheaper, but they don't guarantee a response time. They can legally take as long as they want to adjudicate your application. You can go on to the website and look up their processing times. Right now, we're seeing regular processing take anywhere from like 4 to 8 weeks. So I would say get your ducks in a row, like at least 3 to 4 months in advance if possible. If not, then you might want to consider premium processing. It's stupidly expensive right now. It's $2,500 for premium, and they guarantee a response in 15 calendar days or less. So it's much quicker, but it's also really expensive. So it's good to try and get your petition in advance, yeah.
I read that they're planning on tripling
Yes.
the fees. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so they propose to raise the regular fee from $460 to like $1,600, yeah, $1,650. It's not approved yet, it's just been proposed. There was a comment period where you could write in and say, don't do that, please. Last time they tried to do this in 2019, they proposed it and then they instituted it, and then immediately they were met with a legal challenge, and it got challenged in the court system, and it was ultimately didn't go through. So, and the new proposed changes are equally legally problematic. This isn't really my focus, yeah, so, and I think, I'm all about trying to make this as cheap and as easy as possible, but the comment period already changed. There's not really any news about it yet. We don't even know when they might push through the changes, or like what date it might start. But again, I'm not super worried about it because like one of the proposed changes is limiting petitions to I think 25 people on the petition. So like if you have a bunch of people on your crew, or like you're bringing over like a bigger band, or like an orchestra, you have to file multiple petitions, and it just starts to get, just prohibitively expensive. So I think there are plenty of points in their proposal that attorneys with more knowledge and experience than I have could fight them in the US court system about these proposed changes. So yeah, that is sort of a looming dark cloud in the distance, but it's, nothing has been changed yet. This is still the accurate information. And if it does get changed, I'm gonna zoom ahead real quick. There is a really good website called artistsfromabroad.org. It's maintained by the League of American Orchestras, and some attorneys maintain it pro bono. Has everything we talked about and in way much more detail, such that you could go on to artistsfromabroad.org and step by step it outlines everything you need to do to file a petition. And there's also a good explainer about the tax requirements on foreign artist pay. Real quick, yeah, go ahead.
You do need concrete dates, right? When you
Yeah,
concrete school dates.
yeah. So the government says O visas can be valid for up to 3 years, and P visas can be valid for up to 1 year, but it's not guaranteed from applying. You can't just send in a couple of show dates and say, I want a 3-year visa. They'll only approve the visa for as long as you can show that you have work, which is frustrating because, they say you can have a 3-year visa, but no one is booking 3 years in advance, there are, sort of workarounds. We can talk about that afterwards. But yeah, for the most part, they will only approve the visa for as long as you can show you have bona fide US work.
What if, a quick question
yeah.
about that, what if you have a tour set for a certain amount of time, but let's say 2 months after you have an inquiry, so you're still working out the deal.
Mhm.
Can you apply for that already, because you know it's gonna happen, but you don't have a deal memo yet, for example?
They want to see it's generally better to submit signed documentation. So, I mean, if the deal memo has all the work information, has the date, the location, how much the artist is being paid, you could just throw a signature on there and say, yeah, the artist has agreed to this deal memo, and include it in the petition. But once the petition's filed and approved, that is set. So you can't retroactively add more time to the already approved petition duration. Yeah, like once the petition's approved and you got your visa with the, work visa expiration date in it, you can't easily add it. You have to file a new petition to get a new visa for those new work dates, unfortunately. Yeah, go for it.
How does that work with the letter of intent? Oh, it's like
Yeah,
it's
so-
a letter of intent for that festival.
Yeah, sure.
2000.
So the petition, the bucket of employment documentation that you need to submit in the petition, generally, it should have the date on it of when the work is happening, the location where it's happening. It should have like whoever's saying that they're employing you, whether it's the promoter or the venue. It should have their contact information on it. It should show how much you're being paid, if anything, or whatever the deal is, like if it's a door deal or whatever it is. And then ideally it should be signed by the parties involved. At least should be signed by the applicant, whoever's we're saying the artist is in the petition. And that's all that the work contract should have, whether it's a deal memo, a letter of intent. It could even be an email between the parties. If it has all that information, you print it out, sign it, include it in the petition. That should be sufficient in order for the government to say, yeah, okay, they have that work coming out.
Just a quick question. Once you've got the year visa, is it possible to add or change any of the venues within that year?
Great question. Love that question. Yeah, sure, totally.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you can sort of format how the government says you can either be employed by a single employer. So if you're coming to do a one-off show at like Lincoln Center or something, you could only play that Lincoln Center show. But if you submit at least 2 performance contracts from 2 different employers, then you would be submitting the petition showing that you have multiple employers. And this is a great question. I love this question. Because this really gets sort of
It's the heart of it, doesn't it?
it gets around the dumb regulation language of being like, here's one contract at the beginning, maybe you sprinkle a couple other contracts in the middle and one at the end, and then you don't need a contract for every single date that you're looking for the time that you're going to be in the US. As long as you're like bookending the work and maybe showing some in the middle,
Intent.
then you would be employed by multiple employers, and it allows you the ability to work with whoever. After the petition's approved and you have your visa, that work can change. You could add, subtract, multiply. You could,
Can you extend to?
No.
The
No, sorry.
Or like what happens when you run out?
Yeah, so there is we talked about that a little bit in the beginning. Once you have your visa and you're here, you can file, your petitioner could file a petition to extend your stay. It doesn't extend the visa printed in your passport, but like we talked about with the I-94, it would extend your I-94. So for the visa is a travel document. You can think of it as a key to get into the door of the country. So if your visa is expired in your passport, but your petitioner filed a petition to extend your stay and extend your I-94, you're allowed to continue working in the US pursuant to that extension petition. But if you wanted to do like a show in Canada and then come back into the US, you couldn't, because you would need to get a new visa, because that's your key to get in. So your visa may be expired. So you would need to get a new visa before you try and re-enter. But yes, you can extend your stay once
While
you're
you're
here.
in the US.
While you're in the US, yeah. You can file a petition to extend your stay. If you're like, oh, my petition's expiring soon, but I have some more work that I have coming up, you can file a petition to extend your stay here so you can continue working and doing that work. Yeah.
You get costs all over again?
Yeah,
You have to
unfortunately.
like file it,
You
basically.
have to file a new petition. You don't have to go through the embassy process again. You're already here. You already got your visa and entered. But if you did want to leave and re-enter, you would need to get a new visa showing the new approval notice with that extension petition that you filed. Great question. I love these questions. Yeah.
If you have your P1 visa for an ensemble, are you allowed to travel on your own on that work?
Ooh, yeah.
You always have to be with the same institute.
So P1 is for ensembles, members of internationally recognized groups. I would say to be safe to perform with at least one other person in the group while you're here. So like if you're here with your band and you want to do like a DJ set one night while the band's off from playing shows, it's not really legally above board. But if you say like, this is a DJ set by this person from this band, and like the band's name is like in like the advertisements and stuff, I think it's a bit of a gray area. I think like, there is an argument to be made that you were working pursuant to your band, but if you pick up a job as like a barista or something, I think, that would not be kosher. I think you should be doing stuff that's pursuant to what you said you would be doing, like working as a musician.
We're not we're applying for these for a year, but we're flying back and forth.
Yeah.
Because we have other tours.
Yeah.
In other countries. So if there's a request made for a part of the group, is it possible for them to
Yep.
split up?
Yeah.
On that same work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think as long as there's one other person performing with you, then yeah, I think that's totally fine. I think you sort of get into legal gray area if it's just one person in the band doing the work. But again, I think there is an argument to be made that if it's like billed as the band performing and it's just you and you have like, a drum machine or whatever, that I don't think that it would come back to haunt you, really. Yeah. Good question. One other thing I want to touch on that I don't really focus on too much, but it's good to know and have the information is taxes. So when you're doing a tour, venues will withhold 30% of your guarantee for tax consideration. It's a withholding. It's not a tax. So if you file what's called a Central Withholding Agreement or CWA with the IRS leading up to the US tour, then you will get your entire fee. And I think it's really important I don't know if I can answer too many questions about this because I don't really deal with taxes. I deal with immigration stuff. But I think it's pretty important to know about just because that 30% cut that the venues will withhold until tax time is a pretty significant amount of money, especially when some of these US tours are already, operating on a razor's edge. So, like I said, you could file CWA with the IRS, and once you're here for at least 7 to 10 days, you can file for a social security number, which you'll need in order to file CWA. And I'm gonna go back to this artistfromabroad.org. Write it down, check out the website. It's a really good free source for all of this information. They have a section about the visa requirements, and they also have a section about tax requirements, which will discuss all the tax questions you may have in great detail that I will not be able to talk about at this session, because I don't do taxes. Another really good resource for artists that is free is, this is a bit of a plug, but my firm's nonprofit, Tamizdat, we have this program called Avail, which is, so filing the petition, you don't need a law firm to file it for you. Like we talked about, you can have your US petitioner, your friend, file the petition documents for you. They can print out all the forms off the website. I sort of think about it like you can file your taxes yourself, but you may want an accountant to do it for you because you could mess it up somehow. Same thing like with this petition process. You can do it yourself. You can file a petition with your petitioner yourself without involving a law firm, but the law firm may be able to get you a better result than doing it yourself. However, if you want to do it yourself and you file it yourself and you run into issues, Tamizdat will help you pro bono if you have a petition filed and say you run into an RFE, or they'll also help you if, like, say you've come to the US and you're at the border and the customs officer is like, oh, we don't believe that, you meet one of these exceptions that we talked about earlier, and you go into secondary questioning. You can hit up Tamizdat and say, hey, help me. What do I say? To get me through. Tamizdat is there. They're not going to help put your petition together for you, but if you've already fully deep in the process and then you run into issues, Tamizdat will help you pro bono. So these are two really good resources to know about. And that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
This one, if you travel, do you need to visa that you gonna go busking?
Great question. Technically, yes.
It depends if you open your case or not.
No, I think the case can be open. It's just, I think the main thing to worry about is, one, when you're flying over, if you're carrying a guitar with you, that's sort of like a red flag to customs officers. They're like, oh, you got a guitar here. What are you gonna do with that? You're gonna perform some shows. So I think you could run into issues there. I think if you come over as a tourist and then you use your buddy's guitar and you're busking out in the street, I don't know how you would run into issues. I think a thing to worry about that is sometimes if you don't have like a permit in order to busk, you could get arrested.
You can buy a guitar.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, you can just go with no gear. And
So like, I buy a gift for your guitar.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think that's an important thing to know. And especially we talked about the the exceptions for managers. If you're a manager and you're coming over and you're just, signing contracts and attending business meetings and you're just attending the show, you're not like carrying gear. But if you're like traveling with the artist and the band and you're there and they're all in leather jackets and you have like a suit and tie on and you're carrying somebody's guitar, like it looks like that you're a manager, you're like the tour manager. I think optics is a big thing to think about when you're entering, because customs and border protection officers, they're like everyday middle Americans. They're not like music people or like arts people. I think they think about like, Katy Perry and stuff. Like when they think of like people coming over to perform, they're not necessarily thinking about the nuances of the process. So I think like, if it looks like you're a tour manager when you show up, even if you're not, you're just, the rules because we talked about it. I think like you could get dinged for that and you could get stopped and sent back. I think a lot of the times though, it's being confident, it's making eye contact, it's like knowing your shit and doing your homework. And also, yeah, like you might want to get a visa if you're traveling with a whole group that has work visas and you don't. Yeah, I think that's what I would say about that. Hey.
Do you also help like yourself or with Tamizdat with like the petition itself? Like function as a lawyer?
No. Tamizdat's there to help in the last hour,
So only like
If-
Just act as a sponsor.
No, oh, yeah, so that's another thing that Tamizdat does function as. If you don't have a friend or a US manager, US agent, US label, you don't have a US cousin that will function as your petitioner, Tamizdat will function as your petitioner for a small fee. I think we charge $50.
Okay. And does
So-
it influence like the decision you think of the government in issuing the visa? Whether it's like a US
No, again, it's just this like petitioning entity. They just want someone that isn't the applicant filing the paperwork that lives in the US. It can be anybody.
It doesn't matter how much cloud.
I don't think so. No, I mean, maybe it looks a little better if it's like, this is WME or something, like, you know, this is Atlantic Records filing your petition. But I mean, at that point, you know, your petition's probably pretty solid if you're signed to a major label. So yeah, no, it doesn't matter. I don't think it, you know, tips the scale in your favor if you have Tamizdat versus like, you know, your cousin filing a petition, functioning as your petitioner. Yeah. Cool. There's no more questions. Oh, yeah, no, sorry. I keep looking at this side for some reason. There's totally people over here. Hey,
A petition is filed for a group, right? The P1, for example.
for the P1, yeah.
Do you pay the fee for the whole group or per member?
Great question. No, it's per petition is the filed. So you would pay for the P1 for the band. It doesn't matter how many people are on the petition. You just pay the one $460 fee with filing the petition with the government. But if you want to bring a crew, then that would be a P1S visa, and you would file a separate P1S petition for that. So then you'd be paying 2 fees. It doesn't matter how many people are on the crew. You just file that one.
And if you go for an O visa,
Yeah.
and then like, for instance, the lead person of the band is the main one and the rest is like backing band,
Oh, yeah.
you have to file 2 petitions.
Yeah. So that's a good question. The O is for individuals, right? But sometimes, you know, like you have a band and you want to try and get longer than a year-long visa. If like maybe the lead singer does all the interviews, or maybe someone in the band did like a solo album or something. Sometimes you can like kind of prop up someone in your band as the individual of extraordinary ability, and then the rest of the band can be filed as that person's backing band. And like you're sort of structuring it as an O and O2, even though you're coming to perform as a group, just to get a longer duration. So that's like a good workaround sometimes if you want to get longer than a year as a band.
You only pay double the fee.
You still have to pay a fee per petition,
Yeah.
but you may get a greater value out of the process because you're getting more than 1 year, because if you're a band, it's only valid for up to 1 year, the petition. But if you know that you have tours this year and you have tours planned for next year, you already have, you know, some holds in place or whatever, already have recording plans, and that's longer than a year, you know, you could potentially, I think there's an argument to be made that you could file for one of the guys in the band as the individual and the rest of the band as the O2 support staff, and just come and work as a band and just enter on O visas. Yeah. I'm gonna go with you first. Sorry.
I was thinking financially, I get very nervous about this whole thing,
Yeah,
because I
me
would
too.
love to go to America and work there, but I can
Yeah.
see having like one spot to perform something, and
Sure.
then you get there and rent is like this and groceries are like this and just life is like this, and
Yeah.
you cannot do any work as a barista, like you said, or
Yeah.
something that's not in your field of work. Is it like an investment of a year where you save up money to go to America to work, or do people actually make money out of it?
Good question. I mean, I think, yeah, you may want to think long and hard about getting super invested into the process if you haven't had some like significant success already in your home country, you know, like it's sort of not an immigration question, so it's hard to answer. But yeah, I mean, I just saw on NYC Reddit that a ham and cheese sandwich is going for $29 at a bodega in the US in New York. I was like, what? That's insane. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of money. But we were talking about this earlier. I think the significant cost of the process, if you are able to get your stuff in order and you're able to file a petition yourself, the significant cost is my fee, like the legal fees, paying an attorney to file a petition for you. So, I mean, if you're able to do it yourself and avoid paying an attorney, I think $460 for a filing fee with the government, I mean, isn't that much. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I hear all the time about artists that come and do a tour and it loses money. A lot of times artists come just for that exposure, and it is huge. I mean, the US is one of the biggest markets for the entertainment industry, so if not the biggest. So I think there are opportunities, and I feel like we're getting sort of into like music industry talk rather than like immigration stuff. But yeah, it's something you gotta sort of weigh the pros and cons, because something that I think people don't think about is how big the United States is. Like if you're coming and you want to like do a tour, like it's not super easy to like play a show in New York and then fly to LA and pay for a flight to LA. Like or driving across the country, that would take you like a week, and you're paying for all these Happy Meals along the way. It can get really expensive. So I think having a good plan in place and really doing your research goes a long way in making it viable financially. So I hand it back over to you.
Yes, well, maybe it's interesting to clarify the OMP and give you some examples. Is that possible?
Sure. What do you mean?
Well, you have the O visa and the P visa, and can you give some examples of bands, performing artists that fall into the O visa and P visa?
So an O would be like Elton John wants to come and perform, or Katy Perry. They would apply for that person as an O, and then their backing band, their crew, their managers, their technical support, their emotional support. Everyone else would go on the O2 visa. However, like we talked about before, there's some wiggle room there. You could say like, Elvis Costello and the Attractions are a band because they are known as Elvis Costello and the Attractions. Even though Elvis Costello could also go for an O visa. Pretty sure Elvis Costello is American though. Not a great example, but you know what I mean. Yeah. There's some wiggle room there. You could. It's a lot of times in the petition you're making an argument to the government of why you're right and they're wrong. So yeah, I think Ps can also be not just bands. We're talking about like any sort of performing group. It could be a theater production, it could be a comedy troupe, it could be puppeteers, it could be any performing artist that's going to be performing on stage as a group. And then the crew for a performing group would be just technical crew. You couldn't have like a backing artist on the crew petition for a band or a performing group. They would all need to be on the P1. And then anyone not on stage for the P1S would need to be on the P1S crew.
For art residences, it's the same process.
Say again?
Like if I'm gonna do art residency somewhere else there, like in a gallery, I'm gonna live there for 6 months to explore my project.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same process of visa. Or there's something different.
So like you're talking about as like a visual artist.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the same process.
Okay.
Yeah. all my examples are about music because I'm a music person, but yeah, it's the same exact process. You need to prove that you have work. You need to prove that you are an impressive visual artist through your biography, press, recommendation letters. Yeah, same exact process. Yeah.
Does the P1S or the O2 bars, do they need the same amount of evidence for like being extraordinary abilities? Do they need to prove the same sort of venues, or does the crew will be like enough
Great
if they
question.
just
Yeah.
add to the O1 visa
Yeah.
because it's already fulfilled?
So the main thing you need to prove with the support petitions are that these individuals are essential in order for you to work successfully in the US as the artist. So if you just like hire some like session musicians in like the weeks leading up to the tour and to like help perform your show, that wouldn't really be a viable option. You know, you need to show that you've worked with your crew in the past, that you've like done rehearsals with them, or you know, you've done shows with them. You need to talk about like how many rehearsal hours you've done with them. You need to prove that like they're essential in order for the artist to work successfully in the US. So
At
yeah.
the same time, you're responsible for the crew. Like if someone run away and you don't find the person, they want to stay in the US and you have to go back home.
Yeah.
And someone is missing what you're doing. You're responsible
No.
as an artist. Or
No, you're not responsible. I mean, you know, you're responsible for yourself, but I think you can think of it like as a scale. You know, like yeah, if one person in the group, you know, leaves and goes AWOL, then that's one thing. But if you bring over a crew and all 10 of them disappear and don't return home, like that's more of a concerning thing. And then I think, you know, a one-time thing is not a big deal, but I think we talked about it before. If it becomes a pattern, then yeah, you know, they start to think that you're gaming the system rather than just this one person having, you know, falling in love or having a crisis or something.
I want to ask you in case that you have a concert or a project with your home embassy in US, it's applying for visa or not? It's just a contract between embassies.
Yeah, I think that would fit in the cultural programs. If it's being sponsored by an embassy, then yeah, I think that you wouldn't need a visa for that. You could just say that, and if that is a situation, we can talk about that later. I can give you some like specific information about that. There's specific like regulation that you can cite like when you're coming over to say this is part of like, you know, cultural exchange situation. Yeah.
One last question.
In the back.
I wonder if this is maybe for after with the drinks and everything to find you, but I was like, maybe there's other people that have a similar question, because I'm not in the music business. I'm an actress and a TV host.
Cool.
And my experience, I've been in the States a lot. I've had visas before for studying and stuff abroad. But in terms of having a visa, the chicken and the egg story for me is the thing. Like auditions and talking to people and people asking me like, hey, oh, you're so great. Are you authorized to work here? And I have to say like, oh no, man, I would still have to apply for my visa. So for me, it's more like, okay,
it's a big challenge.
It's a big challenge because I can't get an O visa without the dates and the work.
And you can't get the work
without the visa, or that's how it felt up until now. So I wonder if you have any experience with that, or clients similarly.
Totally, yeah. It's not a great situation.
Oh, thanks.
Unfortunately, yeah. But you can get, if you're just coming to audition, you don't need a work visa for that.
No, exactly. So yeah,
you're not working.
Exactly.
You're doing activities to potentially get work down the road. So you could come over as a visitor and audition, but then
I would have to get back.
You sort of run into the issue of like logistics, you know, like
And time.
time and logistics. Yeah, like you can come audition, but then if you get hired, you would need to leave, go through the whole visa process, get the visa, then come back and then start work. So like in acting, you know, especially with film and TV, it's a major hurdle for international actors to try and get visas without being sort of established already, you know what I mean, in your home country. So yeah, it's a challenge, but the one thing you could do is get a visitor visa to come and audition, and then.
But you said without being established in your home country.
Yeah, so I mean, I deal with actor applications where, you know, they've done a lot of, you know, theater in abroad, they've acted in foreign films, and they, you know, they get an agent and they start getting bigger gigs, and then they need to come over for work in like Hollywood.
Yeah.
But they were tapped specifically for the work, you know, the director, casting people wanted that actor. So it's for, you know, the vast majority of applicants, it's like not really the process. Usually you're auditioning to get the work. So yeah, I get it. It's a challenge as an international actor to try and get US work without a visa, because, you know, to go through the whole process, and like you said, it's sort of like a catch-22. I don't have good advice for that, except for, you know, you can come over with a visitor visa. I would say get a B1, B2, because then you have a visa, and if you get the work, you can also then file to change your status since you have a visa. If you wanted to just come over on ESTA, you could do that and audition, but then you would need to come back and then re-enter. So if you got a visa, you could come audition, you have 90 days to be here auditioning, and then if you land a job, you could file a petition to change your status from the B tourist visa to a work visa. So that would be.
And then I would have to visit an embassy, or not an embassy, but a
No, you would.
Something there?
No, you would just change, you would file to change your status, so you'd be changing your I-94, like your admission information. You would still have the visitor visa in your passport, and then if you ever did leave the US, and your change of status petition was approved, then you would take that approval notice and get the work visa put in your passport to re-enter. Because the visa is just the travel document. It generally controls your admit until date and your status, but not always. You can file a petition to extend your stay, and you can also file a petition to change your status. So you
While being there.
Yeah, so you come over on a visitor visa, and then you could find work, and then you can file a petition to change your status from the visitor to the work visa.
Not if you're on ESTA, right? Only if you're
Not on
B1.
ESTA though, because
Only on the
that's a visa waiver situation.
How long can you stay on the B1?
Up to 90 days.
Oh, so it's
So it's the
Generally.
same as ESTA.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's-
let's do the ESTA thing.
Hmm?
If it's the same, like.
Because the advantage is you can change it.
ESTA isn't available to every country also. So, and ESTA isn't available to people that have criminal issues. So that's the difference too. And yeah, ESTA is really easy for people that just want to come as a tourist with countries that have good relations with other people. But if you want to take back over, I think we should wrap up, and I'm happy to.
I have a question.
Okay, one last one back here.
Does the same like apply to like an artist exhibited in gallery?
Say again?
An artist exhibiting in a gallery,
Yeah.
does the same apply?
Yeah, same process.
Yeah.
All of my examples are like music world, because that's my state. Yeah.
With like not performing arts, with like visual.
Same deal. I mean, I just don't focus on that because it is sometimes more challenging to, bands perform I mean, visual artists do shows too and have press and whatever. So yeah, it's the same process. It's just my focus is performing arts world in terms of live, on stage performers. But it's all the same process for artists, users, yeah. It's great talking with everybody. I hope this was helpful and not super scary.